any other advice you'd give to builders in this space, whether they're PMs or engineers or founders working on AI? Like, is there one key piece of advice you'd give them to help be successful in this space?
I think that the world is going to change for tech. I'm like one of the AI optimists. And so I think that there's a lot of unknowns, but if you're optimistic about the future, I think it's what you should build is things that assume that AI is going to be good, AI is going to be transparent, AI is going to reduce cost. And then just make sure that you're embodying those values in the products that you're creating and that you're using AI for positive outcomes for humanity and making humans more productive and happier and breaking down barriers versus I think in some ways, AI could go back against a lot of the promises of an open internet. And what I think a lot of people join technology to create is this openness and this connection to people. When you're creating things, not just what can you do, but why are you doing it and should you do it? And how does the world look in the future, building the world you want to live in?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Deployed. Today, we're fortunate to talk with Ajit Varma, who's VP of Product at Mozilla Firefox. Ajit's been a product leader for a long time. He worked at Google, he worked at Meta, he worked at Square. He was a founder himself and brings a lot of perspective about just building in tech generally. We talk big picture about the future of the web and the future of browsers as a category, how he's thinking about important things like keeping the web open and Mozilla's commitment to privacy, what it all means as they move into more use of AI in the browser. And then Ajit also goes deep with us on what they're actually building with AI into the Firefox product, how they're thinking about building, some of the tactics that they're using. So it's a great listen both for just anybody interested in tech and thinking about the future of the web, as well as for builders in this space who might be curious about how they're doing privacy preserving AI at Mozilla. And with that, we'll jump in. Thanks for listening. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm joined today by Ajit. And Ajit, I'm going to ask you to just jump in. It'd be great to hear a little bit for folks who don't know you, who you are, some of your background, but you're leading product at Firefox. We all know Firefox. Maybe you could just start by talking to us about who you are in your career and kind of the through line that led you to Firefox.
Sure. So I'll start from the beginning. So I started my career as an engineer. This is 20 plus years ago. So built a lot of websites and B2B exchanges back in the day. Decided to move into product management. Started my career in product management at Google and was there from 2004 to 2010. Led some of major Google products like search quality, ads quality. Left to start a company. I did startups for about 6 years. Started my own company, which is called AdQ. Today, you probably call it an AI company. Back then, it was a big data company where we were looking at all these signals that were happening around you in the world in order to create more custom creative and custom ads. But we had data sparsity problems. Didn't really work out. Ended up selling the technology of the company. And that led me to being at Square for about 4 or 5 years. At Square, I led product for new products. So things
that's a cool job title. I saw that. A lot of people would be jealous to do that kind of work.
Yeah. So it is a lot of fun. And especially those early days of a startup where, you're just trying to figure things out. It's really invigorating. Did that for a little while. Went back to Google where I led product for Gmail, Google Calendar, a few of the different apps. And then prior to Mozilla, I was at WhatsApp for about 6 years, leading monetization. And that was payments in WhatsApp, small business product, and the API product. But the through line for all these things is I want to have an impact. And to me, it's whether it's a startup or a big company, it's is there something at an inflection point where something is going to change a lot in the next few years? And so when I looked at WhatsApp, it's how people communicate with friends and family is how they're going to want to communicate with businesses. And this is, very different way that people use WhatsApp. And so I've been at Mozilla for about a year, but when I joined, it was very clear to me that people are going to use browsers in a very different way over the next few years. And that's very exciting. But also, as people look at these shifts that are happening, I think it's really important for people's values and companies that follow those values to also just lead the industry forward. And so Mozilla is also a very mission-driven company that's also very exciting for me as well. So happy to talk more about it, but I know we have more time. So
No,
yeah.
that's great. I mean, I think a lot of people listening to the show, I mean, everybody knows Firefox. Probably if they don't run it daily, they all have it installed. Um, you know, I think Mozilla's reputation forever, it's been like strong proponent of the open web. And I know you care a lot about privacy, but like, as we get into this AI conversation, maybe you could like help us connect the dots. Like how should people think about like kind of the pitch for Firefox today? And how do you see the intersection of, what's happening with generative AI and just different ways of using a browser?
Yeah. So part of it is I like thinking like what if almost scenario. So it's like, what if XYZ happen over the next like 5 years? And so if you look at over the last say 20 years for Firefox, like many of the biggest companies today that are leading AI forward are made possible because they had a distribution channel that didn't have like gatekeepers. So Google was a website, Facebook was a website, even ChatGPT was a website, and people went to that website to start. But that's not in the best interest of incumbents. They want to have control. And so if you look like many, many years ago, there were like outcomes like AOL had the internet. And so if you wanted to have chat, if you want to have content, you all went through AOL, and AOL made deals with content companies. And people don't really think about that, but that could have been a very different outcome from the internet if the open web didn't succeed. And so with AI, when you look at the browsers that are existing, they're all very closely tied to an AI solution. So Chrome is tied to Gemini, Edge is tied to Copilot, Atlas from just to be launched. It obviously doesn't give you any choices on AI. It is tied to ChatGPT. Even it's called ChatGPT Atlas, not called OpenAI Atlas. And so with Firefox, we have some inroads that we're putting into AI. You have a sidebar, but you can choose Anthropic, you can choose Gemini, you can choose OpenAI. And so for me, it's like if every browser only allows you to access their own AI, then you're only going to have a handful of AIs that exist. And these companies, they're spending, and people talk a lot about this, but when you're spending hundreds of billions of dollars in AI, you're going to want to control more than just a chat. You're going to want to control almost like every layer of like agents. And then you're going to see like, how does that play out? Then if one company controls agents, then they're going to say, oh, DoorDash is paying me more money. I will send traffic to DoorDash instead of, Instacart. Whereas Firefox, like we are looking at this open view. And so for me, it's like more than just like what exists today, but if everything is consolidated in a single player, it is going to be a bad future in my view.
And that all makes sense in terms of like your position in the market. I'm just sincerely curious, like how do you see, if that's the position, kind of the change in consumer behavior, the potential change, I guess everybody's hyped up about of, less use of the web by people, more use by agents. Atlas is certainly pointing this way. Others have, experiment in this direction. Like, are we just getting the, agent to use the web for us? Like, is that a future that you see happening, or do you have a different view for how, things look in the next few years?
So there's a lot of different use cases that people, of course, use the internet for. And some use cases, like job applications, I look at a good one. Like people, I don't think generally are like, I want to go fill out the same information on a different site, and I want to go like look at job ads every day to find a job. I'm sure they want to focus on like, their skills, and then they would much prefer like an agent to do these kind of like chore, like routine kind of behaviors. But for other tasks, like I'd say, if you're looking at like videos on TikTok, or you're reading things on Reddit and entertainment use cases, hopefully you don't want a bot to do that for you. Hopefully, you find enjoyment and you read articles and stuff. And so I think that AI,
I don't know how bot's going to process like Reddit memes for me and help me understand,
exactly. Hopefully it'll help you create more memes, but hopefully more people read those memes. But it's kind of like AI is like, can it help you do the things in an automated way that you don't like to do? Mm-hmm. But then it creates more space and more time for you to do the things that you love to do on the internet. And so I do think there's like things will evolve. And so people talk a lot about this, but just like how people are probably going to have new jobs, like jobs that existed today, like an Uber driver didn't exist before mobile existed. And like, I'm sure there'll be different use cases. But I think this does lead to a lot of like changes to like business models and stuff. And so there's a lot of companies that make money by showing ads. And so you do get into then a question around like, well, if for a publisher content, like if you're getting more bot traffic, it's like who pays for that? Should the bot pay for it? Should, there be other business models that are not ad supported? And my biggest worry is like, if you don't have these other business models, then do you just lose the incentive to create like independent content, blog content? Do you create the incentive to like not create like high quality products? Because in some ways, like you have another marketplace that's just put in the middle that like takes your margins, which has happened with some big tech companies, which, it's like, what do they create? But most of the profits are just almost like a marketplace kind of model of being in the middle. And one of the problems with the internet is you got rid of middlemen. You go directly to the end business and end user. And so I think like, as we develop AI, it's like we have to be careful of like making sure that we're not just putting more middlemen and gatekeepers, but how do you actually make it so AI just helps you get to the end business and end user? And I think that can happen. It's just we have to make it happen.
How much do you think about like your role as Mozilla? Certainly in the Firefox product, you've got a huge distribution opportunity, but are you all starting to think about experimenting with different business models and monetization paths? Or is that like kind of down the road? I'm just wondering how you see that future and your role in it.
Inference costs are really expensive. Like, and I often like don't know if people really know how expensive it is when you're using like an AI browser, but this kind of point of like, if you run an agentic query, like it costs like dollars per query to run in certain cases. And because we are an open source model, like we are reliant on current revenue streams. And so we think a lot about like, how do we balance all these like different needs? And so some AI use cases like summarization, comparison, they're not that expensive. And so we can manage that with our current business model. But if people really want to go down the path of they really do want agentic behavior, I think there's a few different things that you could see, and we're exploring all the cases. But one is like, do we partner with different companies, and you bring your own model with you, like you bring your ChatGPT or Gemini subscription with you. Do you have a browser-based subscription? And then the last option is you see if like, is there ads that are in these agentic use cases? I think that's the least preferable from our side, but I think it's ultimately like we're going to be a browser of choice, and maybe you have all the different models if users want all those different models. But I think we're going to definitely look to what users want before we kind of like push anything on them. I think we're going to see how the market evolves. I think it's definitely like early still for monetization.
Yeah. And that it feels that way to me. I mean, some of what you said makes sense, right? Like, I can imagine, right? If a big part of your world is distribution partnerships today on the monetization side, like doing that with helping people get set up with a good agentic browsing experience makes sense. You mentioned ads would be like least preferable. I know everyone has a mixed relationship or just thinks ads are terrible. My background, I know you worked at Meta, I worked at Twitter. One of our product leaders, said it well one time, which is ads have been this incredible normalizing force, like equalizing force in the world, where no matter how much money you make, you've been able to get access to free stuff on the internet. Like, how do you think about what like ads mean in that world? You mentioned they're not as preferable, but do you have any vision for what, like, even if it's not something Mozilla is driving, like what do ads in an agent mean in the future?
Like, I love that you brought that up because it is like an important distinction, because it sounds like you've worked a lot on ads or in your Twitter, you see this dynamic. And there's this like balance of like privacy for us at like Mozilla of like, okay, you can create great ads if you use all your browsing history, if you use all the data, if you use all your logins. But simultaneously, it's like, then you get into a lot of like the things that people don't like about social media, where it's like, then you build experiences for engagement loops and you're trying to like show more controversial topics. And so I think that there's probably definitely like this option of choice. And so for us, like when we say ads, like my hope is like that it just costs to go down. that it doesn't mean that we have to show like things that are maybe who pays us the most. But you're totally right. Like it may not play out that way, and people need more power. And then it's like, okay, ads could be definitely that way to democratize like access to this power, and especially in like markets where you may just like not have like the income levels where people are going to spend like $20 a month on a subscription. It is, I think, very important. And so you're definitely right. Like, choice, I think, is more important. So if it was a choice of not giving someone an option at all or showing ads, I would definitely say showing ads would be the way that I would go.
I mean, I think we haven't seen at scale any kind of ads in an agent or ads in a chatbot use cases yet, but I do wonder what it turns into. It kind of leads to this question, like you're talking some about the monetization and business and distribution side, but just from a pure consumer perspective, as we think about kind of this like next generation of using the web, I'm curious how you think, like what's important to get right for consumers? I think one of the experiences I've had, I've tried out some of these AI browser experiments, candidly, like Arc and Comet, and like they're cool, but I haven't stuck with them. My daily driver is just still a normal web browser. And, I wonder how you think about evolving the consumer behaviors here.
Yeah. So you're like, what use cases like resonated with you? I like can talk about them because I think for us, like, we see a lot of the same examples, but, we don't yet know like how people are, or like what the perception is for agentic browsers.
For me, like the example that you described of, I want to work on a job application process at scale, like that pattern of a, research and cyclical thing, like go out and get a bunch of the same things done for me. Like that has made sense, but it hasn't necessarily felt like a problem to solve in the browser. And then, alternatively, like this idea of help me quickly make sense of what's going on a web page, summarize this, help me, like be kind of riding alongside as I use the web. I would say maybe like has been appealing, but hasn't like manifested in a product experience that's really felt like it's just a hook and compelling for me personally yet. And maybe the same one on the like agentic go book my travel type use case that gets thrown around all the time. I haven't trusted it yet. Like I think we're all still kind of working in those stages. And I say this as somebody who's been building this stuff for the past few years. So that's just the honest, it's hard to change consumer behavior, right?
Yeah, so it's insightful. So I've spent a lot of time like talking to some of the other like agentic browser makers to like understand their patterns, and we've done a lot of research studies ourselves. And I think being in tech, you're often trying things a lot more than like the average user out there. And so when we see our own behavior, people experiment like with things in the browser, like, summarize a page. Like it's actually like adoption, but it's still small. Like it is like 3, 4, 5% of people that are adopting it. And for more AI use cases, like, ChatGPT is like 10 characters away. Like you type in your URL and you hit enter. And so I think with a lot of cases, like it's like, are you trying to solve a problem that isn't exactly there? And so I've used browsers, and a lot of times, like one example came up is you type Wikipedia and you hit enter, and it's like, we're going to tell you all about the history of Wikipedia. When it's like, well, is that what the user really wants? Like, do I need a chatbot to talk to me about Wikipedia? I probably want to go to wikipedia.org. And so I think it's going to be like, how do you build things that are actually like valuable to users? And I think your job case like is a great example, because that's like something that like people don't want to do. Like it is tedious, it is routine, like, it's, I would say in some ways like annoying to like just enter the same information like again and again and again. And so what I am more excited about is not the like go build a grocery cart for me, because this is an example a lot of people come up with. I'm like, I actually like going to the grocery store.
I want to
like
my own fruit. Thank you.
Exactly. But it's like, do I want to fill out the same job application 10 times? Like, no, like I'd rather, bot do that for me. And so I think it is like trying to make sure that you don't like get rid of like what humans like to do and the humanity of like surfing the web. And that's why I talk a lot about like entertainment, which I'm like, Store is really cool, and I like it a lot. But I'm like, I want to see like people doing stuff. Like, I don't want to have to like look at something. I'm like, is it AI? Is it not AI? And I'm like, it's just like, to me, it's like, it's cool, but it's like it just takes away this like human connection that I think is what the internet like enabled. It's like this network effect.
And that's, I mean, it's interesting hearing you talk about that. I'm even reflecting on my own answer to you, because like I think I gave you the answer in light of what I think about as browser features. But if I think about like, what's been probably the most compelling consumer experience, I'd say two things. Like one is just using a powerful chatbot, especially for research tasks, right? And then in search, like I think Google's done a great job improving their AI summaries, and I don't rely on them, but it's like often I'll have a type of a search query where there's a helpful answer initially, and then it kind of makes me want to then go look for the right, source to click and go deeper on. I can imagine that stuff getting better. I can also imagine some of the things I treat as a chatbot moving more into just the core browser experience, and maybe you just don't know which one you're using at a given time.
And I feel like it's like a great point, because what I also hear is that people are doing a lot of things they just never thought that they could do before. So before, if your pattern was, I'm going to ask a question, is there a website that's there about this? And I'll go Google search. But, there's like the World Series that's happening right now. And so I'm like, let me ask all these like really unique questions, like what happens if the team is in this situation? And I'm like, I know probably no one's created a website, but when you do an AI query, it'll come back with like, oh, these are all the different things you should think about. And the same thing with like creation of content. And so, certain people like to create websites. Now it's a lot easier to create websites. And so you have like more people that can create things on the open internet. Can you create more content? And so I think like, it's not just limited to people who are creative, but people who are maybe not as creative, can they become creators? And I think that's like, at least for me, like a more exciting outcome for AI on the internet versus AI taking over everything.
I am with you in that. It's interesting, like we've been talking about this and we're kind of bleeding back and forth between like, well, what's actually in a browser and what's just like, AI helping create more web content or AI that you access through a browser. As you think about maybe just like the Firefox product itself, for folks that are listening and maybe don't know, we could start with like, what have you actually done natively with AI capabilities today? And then it would probably be interesting to chat a little bit about how you see the future specific to your product. You mentioned like there's the chat sidebar, but kind of give us the landscape. What have you done so far? We can start there.
So today, if you use, and I would call it classic mode, but in classic mode, there's a lot of features that we built that are trying to like introduce who I'd say is like AI explorers. People, may not be super into AI day in and day out, but like, they've heard about AI. They want to make it a little bit easier. How do they have easy access to it? So some of the features are the sidebar that I mentioned earlier, but this is something where you can expand the left-hand side and you can then switch between different chat providers, AI chat providers. And we do have some entry points like, okay, there's a button to hit summarize your content. And so some of these cases where it's like, how do you blend experience more? We also have a feature called link previews. So if you're hovering over a link and doing like a long click on it, we can render like a little preview of that site so you can see what you're going to see before you have to like click into it. We also are looking at ways to help people with productivity. And so we have a feature called smart tab groups, where if you have a set of tab groups and you like say have like 4 different sites because you're planning a trip to Japan, and we can recommend that you organize your tabs kind of like auto-magically into these like named tab groups that arrange these things. And so you can see a lot of like what we're focused on is like productivity and ease of use. As we were thinking of like the next stage of Firefox, and one thing that makes the browser very unique is that it has so much context and knowledge of the person, as well as has access to things that the person would be able to do, like logins, passwords, cookies. And this is very powerful, but it's also risky. And so on the powerful side, one of the things that we look at is like, say, popular thing for people to do with AI is generate recipes. But if we know that, say, you search for vegetarian restaurants, if you search family vacations, then if you're like, can I meal plan something for tonight? We can say, okay, you probably prefer a vegetarian recipe. You prefer something for like, a family of four. But also things like if we know you like to eat healthy, if you like low carbs, you can start to imagine like this browser context just makes your queries much more powerful. So you don't have to keep refining it. Also on the like login side, it's okay if I want to go book a table at some hard to get restaurant on an open table. And we're like, that's probably like low risk. It's not your credit card. It's not you're purchasing something. I think most users, like in the job case, they probably would want to say, have this bot like constantly like look for restaurants because I'm a foodie, and then come up with something that is much more how you think of a browser of like replay like your decision making, show me how you made it, like send me a pop-up or an alert on my phone that says complete the current transaction. And so these are all things that I think are powerful, but we do care a lot about like the privacy and the security. And so none of these things like we want to force on users, and like it is always going to be a user choice. And I think that also distinguishes how Firefox is going to do it, because when you look at a sort of hierarchy of needs of some browsers, they're like, we need AI to be successful, number one, browser number two. And so in that model, it's like, how to use a browser as a distribution point to get people to use your AI. But we're not there. And so when we think of AI, we're not like send everything to AI. We're like, what is the right queries that, if you're searching for Wikipedia, we'll take you to wikipedia.org. If you're searching for, car insurance, we'll take you to Google search results for, some good example, like places to buy, but also information. And then if you're like, why do the leaves turn brown in the fall? That's an not agentic, but an AI query. And so we'll steer you to like what the right thing is versus maybe a corporate objective.
I'd love to get into in a minute, maybe like how you all are doing some of the building, but like you're getting there right now. I'm curious, how do you think about prioritizing like which AI capabilities are meaningful to pursue in your context? Are there like, as a product leader, principles that you think about for like what makes sense in Firefox and what doesn't?
Yeah. So for Firefox, I think when we think of the users, like they are more privacy conscious. They are, care more about choice. In some ways, like they do care more about like mission driven of like, how do we preserve like an open internet? And so for those reasons, like when we're thinking of like, what are the models that we would use? Do we use local models versus cloud models? It is where we build it in a way that is focus on choice, also a big focus on transparency. And that's like important with our open source background. And so people should be able to understand like, why is a certain thing happening, and more like deterministic behaviors instead of, I think a lot of AI is like non-deterministic like outcomes, but it's like, can we explain more about like what's going on? And so this is all stuff that I think sets us apart in terms of like prioritizing our roadmap. Like, the one thing that does seem is like, a lot of it is not just what we can build, but like a lot of the details around like how we build things. And so if you look at a lot of AI browsers, they do all look kind of the same because they are built on top of Chromium. And that means that it'd be very expensive to build a entirely different UI layer. And so you see, what are the features in Chromium? So Chromium doesn't have vertical tabs. Your AI browser doesn't have vertical tabs. And a lot of the tabs look the same. Whereas with Firefox, like we have Gecko, and it has our own rendering engine, which is kind of like the only other non-Chromium cross-platform, cross-OS rendering engine. But that gives us the power to create very different UI experiences. And so that's like something we're thinking is like, well, what if you started over from scratch and like how the UI look? But then also it's because you're more aggressive. It's like using choice of like, okay, it's not just, it's a choice. Like, it's like in some ways like a private mode, like you can go to private mode when you want to. And so we are looking at it in a very different way, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that seems, I hadn't maybe just until like right now put my head around it. So hearing you frame it that way is inspiring the thought, right? It's like if you have this canvas to really think fundamentally about how the browser could look and feel different. And you also talk about your commitment to the open internet and to, helping all these builders and creative people get distribution and build new businesses. It starts to make me wonder about the future of like extensions and the canvases you could build for people to really experiment with kind of how the future of the web should feel. But do you have maybe like what's the role that extensions play in the strategy? Do you think about that yet or have an answer for where they go in the future?
I love extensions. Like extensions are like how you customize a browser and make it your own. And a lot of the AI features that are being built in a browser, like an own browser, actually can be built completely in an extension. So if you look at something like Anthropic, they didn't build a browser, but they have a Claude extension for Chrome, but it's limited because there's like different like guardrails. Whereas for Firefox, like our extension framework is a lot more powerful than any other extension framework out there. And to get into some of like the technical details, so there's like an old system called Manifest v2, and then it was upgraded to Manifest v3. But Manifest v3 was very interesting because under the guise of security, it started blocking a lot of what extensions could do. But you couldn't solve the security things differently. Like you could just prevent the negative security things from happening in Manifest v2. So the approach that we took is we actually have Manifest v3 and we have all the security things that are there, but we actually still support all the extensibility that was possible with previous extension frameworks. And so then you ask the question of like, well, why is it not supported in other browsers? And it's primarily because of ad blockers, actually. And it's when your entire business model depends upon ads, like then you don't support extensions if they don't conform to your view of the world. And for us, like we are an ad supported business, but our commitment to our mission is like more important. And so that is like why we do support all this extensibilities. And that's true for ad blockers, but it is true for AI extensions as well, where you can build much more powerful AI extensions in Firefox than any other browser.
Makes me curious where it goes, just as a canvas for people to build. Let's shift a little bit. Like, we've talked some about things you're building, just for folks that are listening and curious about how you're building them. You did start to talk, privacy has been a theme through the whole conversation. You talked some about private models. I know you've talked publicly about how, at least in some cases, the things you're doing run on device. But for those first party AI features that you're working on, like tell us a little bit more about how you bring those to life.
Yeah. So another feature that I didn't mention when you had asked about the AI things we were building is Shake to Summarize, which is a feature that we actually launched just a few weeks ago. And it's been really exciting to see how much usage it has. And so for Shake to Summarize,
for clarity, like Shake to Summarize, like shake your phone.
Yeah, it's like literally like you're just shaking your phone. Have you had a chance to try the feature? We're like, yeah, it's gonna be a new paradigm, like pinch to zoom. It's like shake for AI. So
that's awesome. I'm not the person that remembers shake as a behavior, but I love it.
Yeah, it's like I think for a lot of tech people, it's like shake is how you like create a bug report for your OS. And I'm sure that's how it was for Twitter, but in Meta, like Facebook and WhatsApp, it's like you shake WhatsApp and then it sends a bug report.
Dog food mode. Yep.
Exactly. So with Shake to Summarize, we did launch it on like iOS, but not every iOS iPhone has AI Apple intelligence models. So you're basically looking at people who are on like iOS 26, Apple iPhone 15 and above. And the reality is that there's a lot of people who are on other older devices, even like Android devices. And so we have to like make this balance going back to like, we want to be as private as we can, but we also want to create accessibility for features. And so for this, if you have a capable device, we use on-device intelligence, which is more private. But if you don't have this, we fall back to cloud models that then is like still capable of bringing this to a user, even if their device isn't capable. And I think that's the same that's true for desktop. So as much as like we can, we want to keep things on the desktop. So if we have something like an AI model, like your tabs for smart tab groups, like one version is you upload all that information into the cloud, and then in the cloud, you then go process it all and you come back with a recommendation. Versus us, like we keep all that information like on device and only send it up when a user asks for it to be sent up. And we try to do like really clear prompts so you know exactly what's going on. And then ultimately, it's a user's choice. I think in the future, do you want, and I think there's questions on like, will a user understand like what all this means? And so I think we'll have to be smart with defaults. But ultimately, like we want to give users choice, and hopefully in a world where we're like, you can choose, you can use on device. It just means it's going to be less capable, but you can use cloud if you want this. And then even model choice of, do you want to do a like private open model or versus open model because you want to like know what's going on? Maybe you can even pick your models if you're that level of sophistication.
It sounds like in some cases, if I'm interpreting right from what you're saying, Firefox is providing access to private, open source models that you host today, but also that like extension I can imagine is like, well, if I'm a Gemini subscriber or a, Claude subscriber, I could choose to route to those instead for similar features.
Right. So for Shake to summarize, like right now, we're basically hosted on our private cloud using Mistral's open source model. And so we do like some fine tuning of the model, but all the data is like contained in our cloud silo. Like, so it's not being used to train models or anything like that.
A lot of people listening to this are like trying to figure out their own AI operations. And like, be great to hear you talk about the experience of taking some of these things to production at the scale. Like you all are global, you're operating in theoretically any language. How have you thought about, like maybe as a first question is like, any good lessons learned doing that, both in terms of, maybe what was hard you all had to work through and what surprised you that was easy? Like, it'd be great to hear some experiences.
So I think people will talk about it. I'm sure you've seen this in your own career, but dog fooding is usually the best first way to like understand like how people are using it. And so Shake to summarize as an example is, we were using this, an engineer was summarizing a recipe site and they found that it dropped ingredients. Obviously bad.
Yeah.
And so then you have to say, so then we're like prioritizing another layer that's like, okay, let's understand, for recipes, you have to have a longer context window. You have to like look at more characters on the page, like maybe it's at the bottom. And so there's a lot of this like subjectivity versus like objectivity that we have to use. And I think it's a balance. Now, because this is all like new, like there's a lot of like hype in areas. And so the metrics don't always like play out where it's like, you might read an article, you're like, this is the most exciting thing in the world. And you're like, that doesn't come out in the data. But it's also like, maybe it's just a matter of time. Like, you have early adopters who care about it. And, if it's maybe a month, a year from now, you still like, I think if you're a technology company, you still want to make sure that you're innovative. But it is, I think, in some ways, for a company like ours, like there's a question around cost as well. And so venture-backed company, I think the motivation is you raise $100 million, you're either going to be at zero or you're going to be at a 10x multiple of that. And so you don't really care. You're just trying to create something big. Whereas for us, like, because it is a nonprofit foundation that we're under, we do talk a lot more about like how do we make sure that we're not like burning money, like we are making sure that we're a good steward of the resources and our users trust and stuff. And I think that's going to be true for a lot of companies, not just like get focused on the hype that creates like long-term problems for your business or your product, but really saying like, what do users want? What is something that is actually like solving user problems versus can we build it versus a should we build it kind of thing.
A lot of problems are being solved right now by burning VC dollars. It seems like that's
which is great. I'm not sure
driving innovation.
All the AI, but I'm like, this is great. I can generate a coloring page for my kids, and I like you see it processing, and I'm like, I don't know how much money this costs, but it's a nice coloring pages for my year-old to color.
Again, like anything you can share, kind of like next level down about like how you think about those metrics, how do you frame those experiments, both in terms of like usage and quality. Your story about the engineer finding the recipes don't include ingredients. It seems like that kind of detail could replicate all over a million use cases.
Are you thinking about like features that we've launched before, like some of like the history of like how we got to launch?
Both getting to launch and in production too, because I can just imagine your own personal dog fooding behaviors are going to be limited relative to the global scale. So I just wonder how you approach measuring like user satisfaction and adoption of these things.
Yeah. So with something like, I'll say like smart tab groups, is it like as an example. So this is something that we had as an idea. You think of like, what are the productivity use cases that you have personally? What are your things that you're seeing that happening in the market? And we're like, okay, we launched the feature tab groups. People love it. People are like, this really helps me with productivity. I can color code like different groups of things. So then we're like, naturally like, well, AI should be able to help with that. We can like look at the title, we can like automatically do this for you. And so then you say, okay, you're going to devote resources in order to it. And a lot of the like people who are working on AI features, like, it is a scarce resource. Like it is a small group of like talented people. And so we prioritize this. And as you're building for yourself, you're like, okay, you pick one use case, and I think it's like the thin edge of the wedge of like, you're like, let's get into this use case. People use it, then let's, satisfy more use cases. And so the thing we did is like let's focus on things that are like topic based. So, it's like your trip to Japan. And so this is, okay, let's suggest this group. So when we launched this feature, there's a lot of like really exciting like articles that were written about it. There were a lot of, people like internally like, yeah, it's a big win. And so then part of you like, you feel good because you're like, okay, this is validation that the idea was good because people like it.
Yeah.
But then when we look at the metrics, we're like, okay, now we can actually see usage. It's live. And usage is very low. And so then you say, okay, well, what are the things? And so one thing is that you take it from a growth perspective of, okay, you have the right use case, but the flow is not good. And so then you spend some time on like, okay, is it too many clicks to opt into the new terms? Is it maybe too much friction? Is it not enough visibility? And so I think you then, it's almost like hypothesis driven development of, okay, let's try to see, are there funnels that you can improve? But then, there were a lot of them when it's not doing well, there were a lot of hypotheses. And so another big hypothesis that people had was that we just didn't have enough use cases that our models could satisfy. And so it could be like, one person's like, no, people don't care about grouping their trip to Japan. They want to group all their Google Docs together. And so instead you should have like a domain specific like grouper, like group all my docs together, group all my Dropbox files together. But then it's like, okay, well, how much do you keep like going down this like path if people aren't engaging a ton with the feature? And so for us, we ultimately were like, okay, we probably have to get a lot more capable. And that's not going to be like band-aids of let's just do some growth funnel optimization. Like it is like this fundamental, like, it's a much more powerful AI. And so we made the call to actually then pull that team and have them focus on a much more powerful new solution that does this, but does a lot more as well. And so this is like TBD, but a lot of this like came through, looking at production data, looking at the iteration, making a call, like not just reading the articles about people who are excited, but actually looking at the data and then deciding like, do we want to, can we get there? But, I look at growth things as you can get 0.1% better, 1% better, but you're not going to fundamentally like get 10%, 20% better. And so that's definitely where we decided to create a much more powerful solution that we'll be talking more about soon.
I'll look forward to seeing that. Maybe like one follow-up question, but I think, for a lot of folks listening, there's even a lot of probably product people listening to this. You just kind of talked about the classic user retention, adoption, usage metrics space of things. Do you all at your scale and like the breadth of use cases try to pay as much attention to like the actual qualitative aspects of what's being generated by a model? Like maybe it's just people aren't using it because it generated a weird summary or something. Is that a feedback loop that you have spent time on, or is it, just not a priority at your scale?
we definitely have a set of like eval queries that we use. And in some ways like this is like we have a user research team. We've like tried to like speculate on what people might want to do. And so we do a lot of like model comparison, but we're a little bit different because like we're not building our own, model. And so it's more like fine tuning, like prompt engineering. But we do spend a lot of time like deciding like which model is the best model, which is the most capable model, and like balance things. And so some things might work better for summarization versus some things might work better for, tab recommendations. And so that is a lot more on the qualitative side. But I would say that like we have to balance production, the privacy a lot. So we don't log any of those like queries. And so there's like one thing that surprised me is like I talked to one of the other browser AIs and they have complete knowledge of what every single person is like searched. And I'm like, well, we would never do that. Yeah. And I was like, well, what jobs people have applied to. That's crazy to me because like we don't store any of that. We don't want to look at it. And so It is like, I think a challenge of why we also have to use more qualitative, because we, even if, there's the data side, it is not like on a per query basis. And so we don't actually know like what's failing or not, because of privacy protections.
And so if I'm interpreting, it's like evals are, your kind of dog food set, the things you've come up with offline and, that you're building yourselves and then iterating on those. I know we're getting close on time. Maybe before we lose you, you're getting to work on a, world-class product and building in a really interesting moment. Like, any other just like advice you'd give to builders in this space, whether they're PMs or engineers or founders working on AI? Like, is there one key piece of advice you'd give them to help be successful in this space?
Yeah. So I think that the world is going to change for tech. Like I'm like one of the AI like optimists. And so I think that there's a lot of like unknowns, but if you're like optimistic about the future, I think it's like what you should build is like things that assume that like AI is going to be good, AI is going to be transparent, AI is going to reduce like cost. And then just like make sure that you're embodying those values in the products that you're creating and that you're using like AI for like positive outcomes for like humanity and making like, humans more productive and happier and, breaking down barriers versus I think in some ways, like AI could go back against a lot of the promises of like an open internet and what like I think a lot of people join technology to create is like this openness and this like connection to people. And so I would just like, encourage people to think of like when you're creating things, like not just what can you do, but like why are you doing it and should you do it? And like how does the world look in the future if you building the world you want to live in.
That's awesome. It's a good place to end. I'm glad someone with your mindset like that is working on such an important scaled product. So it's great.
You definitely thought a lot about this too. And so definitely love your questions, and hopefully we can chat again and, can see how you're using some of the features we launch and how we can improve it.
I'll look forward to it, Ajit. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right. That's all we have for today's episode of Deployed, the AI product podcast. I'm Ian Cairns, CEO and co-founder of FreePlay. I hope you enjoyed listening. And if you did, we'd love to hear about it. Your reviews mean a lot. They help other listeners. So give us a like, share, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this. And if something stood out to you in the episode, or if you've got feedback or ideas for a future episode, or if you simply just want to learn more, we're up to at FreePlay, shoot me a note. I'm Ian at freeplay.ai. You can also find me on Twitter @Cairns. Thanks so much for listening.